A strict, racist music teacher forces a quiet black student to play the piano just to mock him. Just as the mockery begins, an unexpected figure steps through the door. Morgan Freeman, the boy's grandfather. His arrival results in a humiliating lesson the teacher will never forget. Before we continue, if your child has ever had an encounter with a racist, how did you handle the situation? Let us know in the comments. Mr. Calloway walked into his classroom like he owned the very air within it. His sharp, measured steps echoed on the polished wooden floors of the prestigious private school's music studio. The neatly arranged grand piano, violins resting in their velvet-lined cases, and pristine sheet music covering each desk reflected the kind of refined environment he prided himself on to the outside world. He was a well-respected music instructor, a man who had dedicated years to mastering the art of classical music. But to those who sat in his classroom, his reputation was something else entirely. Mr. Calloway was a perfectionist, but only for the students he deemed worthy. For those who fit his ideal image of what a classical musician should be, he was strict and encouraging. However, for those who didn't, especially students who didn't come from the same background as his prized protégés, he was ruthless. And in this particular class, there was only one student who seemed to bear the full brunt of his prejudice, whom he used for target practice. Jamal Carter was the only black student in a room full of wealthy, well-connected white kids, and that fact alone made him an easy target. Mr. Calloway rarely missed a chance to single him out. It wasn't outright aggression, no, it was the quieter, more insidious kind of ridicule. The little things, the way Mr. Calloway's eyes would gloss over him when handing out praise, the way he would correct Jamal Carter's answers with an unnecessary mocking emphasis, and the way he would laugh just a little too hard whenever Jamal hesitated. Jamal had learned to endure every bit of it. Of course, he had no other choice. This was a prestigious school. His mother always told him, "You belong in any room you walk into." But belonging and being accepted were two different things, and Mr. Calloway made sure he felt that difference. Jamal Carter, a boy with a love for music, was trapped in a hostile class. He had grown up surrounded by melodies. His mother would hum sweet jazz tunes while making breakfast, and his grandfather had filled their home with the rich sounds of blues and classical compositions. Although not physically evident, music was in his bones. But here, in this classroom, music was also a weapon, a tool used by Mr. Calloway to establish superiority. Jamal wasn't weak, but even the strongest hearts could grow weary under constant belittlement, so he had learned to sit quietly, to absorb, to learn in silence, and despite everything he did learn, he studied the techniques. He listened closely to every composition. He memorized every key, every note, every rhythm, because one thing about Jamal, he refused to let anyone take music away from him. On this particular day, the music class was scheduled for the last period before dismissal from school. The atmosphere was light, almost cheerful, at least for the other students. Mr. Calloway moved through the lesson effortlessly, giving instructions, handing out assignments, and, of course, showering praise on his promising students. Jamal sat at his desk, quietly listening as always, until something in the lesson caught his attention. His hand twitched slightly before he finally raised it. The class fell silent because it wasn't common for Jamal to speak. Mr. Calloway turned toward him slowly, his expression unreadable at first, but then a knowing smirk spread across his face. "What is it, Carter?" he asked, tilting his head slightly as if already preparing to mock whatever was about to come out of Jamal's mouth. Jamal hesitated for only a moment before finally asking, "Why do some classical compositions transition between major and minor keys so suddenly? Is it meant to evoke a specific emotion, or is it more of a technical decision by the composer?" A simple, thoughtful question, one that showed he had been paying attention, perhaps even more than some of his classmates. For a second, there was silence. Then Mr. Calloway scoffed. "Oh, how precious," he said, shaking his head. "Carter wants to talk about key transitions." A few chuckles rippled through the class. Jamal felt his stomach tighten. The slow build-up before Mr. Calloway turned a moment of curiosity into a spectacle. The teacher folded his arms, his smirk widening. "Well then, Carter," he said, voice laced with condescension. "Since you're so interested in transitions, why don't you transition from your seat to the front of the class and explain what you mean?" Immediately, the chuckles turned into outright laughter. Jamal froze. Mr. Calloway tapped his foot impatiently. "Come on now, don't waste my time being shy." Jamal swallowed hard. He didn't like standing in front of a crowd. He knew exactly what this was, another one of Mr. Calloway's little games to put him in the spotlight, but something inside him refused to back down. Was this going to be yet another moment where Jamal's voice got drowned out by mockery, or was this just the beginning of something bigger? Slowly, he pushed back his chair, stood up, and made his way to the front of the classroom. If you've ever faced a moment like this, where you had to prove yourself against the odds, drop a comment below. Let's keep going. Jamal took a deep breath and straightened his posture. He had already stepped into the fire. There was no turning back now. He cleared his throat. Well, transitions between major and minor keys are actually really important in classical music. Composers use them to shift emotions and tell stories through sound. Like in Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first movement is in a minor key, and it feels like setting a sad, almost haunting tone. So are the transitions meant to evoke a specific emotion, or is it more of a technical decision by the composer? The classroom fell into an unexpected silence. It was the kind of quiet that only happened when people were thinking, when something truly clicked in their minds. A few students glanced at one another, nodding slightly. Jamal could see it happening. They understood what he was asking now. They weren't laughing anymore. They were listening. But there was one person in the room who hated that shift, Mr. Calloway. He sat at his desk, gripping the edge with whitening knuckles. His usual air of arrogance was slipping, replaced with something darker, frustration, anger. He had spent years establishing his authority, making sure Jamal knew his place, keeping him at the bottom. And now, in a single moment, that balance was shifting. Jamal stared at Mr. Calloway, waiting for his response. The rest of the class did too. The anticipation in the room was thick. Mr. Calloway's lips curled into a smirk, but his eyes held no humor. He let out an exaggerated sigh and shook his head. "Oh, Carter," he drawled, voice dripping with condescension. "That's adorable. You think you can waltz in here, ask some deep philosophical question, and impress the class?" A few students chuckled, though this time the laughter felt more hesitant. Mr. Calloway leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. "Tell me, Carter, are we really supposed to believe you have an ear for classical music, or are you just regurgitating something you overheard while cleaning floors somewhere?" The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate. A couple of students widened their eyes, but no one spoke. The tension in the room thickened. Jamal clenched his fists, but kept his composure. "I just want to understand music the way it's meant to be understood." Mr. Calloway snorted. "Oh, how inspiring. A noble dream from our resident scholar." He turned to the class. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's all take a moment to applaud Carter for his intellectual breakthrough." A slow, mocking clap echoed through the room as Mr. Calloway clapped alone. A smug grin plastered on his face. "Oh, I didn't realize we had a musical scholar in our midst. Tell me, Carter, did you stumble upon Beethoven between basketball practice and break dancing?" Mr. Calloway continued with his mockery. Jamal swallowed hard. He could feel his classmates looking at him, some with pity, some with discomfort, but Mr. Calloway needed to make sure Jamal was humiliated. "You should feel honored just to be in this class, Carter. Some people would say this seat could have been better used on someone who actually belongs here." He continued, "I'm sure when the admissions board let you in, they thought they were doing the school a favor. Diversity quotas and all that nonsense." Mr. Calloway's voice was louder now. At this moment, he felt that it was time to crown the moment with the greatest sarcastic approach, icing his carefully baked mockery cake. His gaze flickered toward the grand piano sitting in the corner of the classroom, and an idea struck him. "Tell me, Carter, do you even own a piano, or is your musical experience limited to whatever you hear in those little Sunday choirs? Maybe we should start a collection for you. A fundraiser? Get Carter a piano so he can pretend to be a musician." He smirked. Jamal blinked, revealing his frustrated state. "What?" Mr. Calloway gestured toward the piano. "Actually, Carter, since you seem so passionate about music, why don't you show us what you know? Go ahead, play something. Surely a music enthusiast like you must have some talent, right?" A wave of quiet laughter spread across the room. The class was catching on now. This wasn't about music. This was about making Jamal look like a fool. Jamal stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Mr. Calloway's mocking smirk stretched wider as the classroom fell into an eerie silence. All eyes locked on the trembling boy. "Well, what's taking so long?" Mr. Calloway's voice dripped with condescension. "I thought you wanted to prove a point. Or is classical music a little too sophisticated for you?" A few snickers rippled through the room. Jamal's face burned. He wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to hide. He stared at the grand piano, its polished surface reflecting his own hesitant expression. It felt like a mountain, impossible to climb. His heart pounded. He wasn't afraid of playing. He was afraid of failing under the weight of the teacher's cruelty. Time stretched. The school bell rang, signaling the end of the day, and Jamal allowed himself a flicker of hope. Maybe Mr. Calloway would just dismiss them, but no. Instead, Mr. Calloway's eyes gleamed with a cruel idea. He turned towards the students gathering their things and clapped his hands loudly. "Hold on, class. Let's not rush out just yet. I think we have a rare performance on our hands. Let's give our dear Jamal Carter here the audience he deserves." Laughter, whispers, a few confused glances, but most of the students followed, eager for whatever spectacle their teacher had planned. What happens when Jamal takes his seat at the piano? Stay with us, because the next turn of events will leave everyone speechless. Hit the like button if you're rooting for Jamal Carter to turn the tide. Jamal's heart pounded so loudly that he barely registered the murmurs of the remaining students in the room. He wanted to move, to do something, anything, but his body refused to obey. Mr. Calloway, still relishing in his cruel amusement, leaned forward with a smug grin, but when Jamal didn't immediately comply, the grin faded into something much harsher. "What's the problem, boy?" Mr. Calloway snapped, his voice slicing through the air like a whip. "Did I stutter? Play the piano. Now." The sudden outburst sent a ripple through the students who were walking past the hallway out towards the exit. Heads turned, whispers spread. Some students who had already stepped into the hallway paused in their tracks. Jamal swallowed hard. He could feel his classmates' eyes on him, their curiosity growing with each passing second, but Mr. Calloway wasn't done. "Oh, don't tell me you're scared," he sneered, pacing around Jamal like a predator circling prey. "What's the matter? I thought you were so curious about classical music." A few scattered chuckles rose from the students still inside. The ones in the hallway, intrigued by the rising tension, began trickling back in. Mr. Calloway's voice boomed again, this time with even more force. "I said play." Jamal flinched. The sharp command was loud enough to carry through the open doors, echoing down the hallway. More students turned around, drawn in by the commotion. "What's going on in there?" One of the students in the hallway whispered. Curiosity quickly turned into interest. Footsteps shuffled. Students abandoned their walk to the exits and started making their way back toward the music studio. One by one, they filed in. First, a handful, then a dozen, then more. They pressed against the walls, lined the doorway, and craned their necks to get a better view. The air grew thick with anticipation. Jamal felt the weight of every single gaze on him, the pressure mounting like an unbearable storm. His chest tightened, his hands felt clammy. Mr. Calloway smirked at the increasing audience, his ego swelling with the attention. This was exactly what he wanted. More eyes to witness his lesson for Jamal. "Well, now you've got a real crowd," he taunted. "Don't keep them waiting. Unless, of course, you're afraid of proving me right." Jamal clenched his jaw. The humiliation burned hotter than ever. This wasn't just a music lesson anymore. It was a spectacle. It was a cruel, calculated attempt to break him, and it was working. Morgan Freeman had barely stepped onto campus when he noticed the unusual sight. Students moving in clusters, all headed in the same direction. Their murmurs filled the air with an unspoken curiosity, their excited steps quickening as they neared the music studio. Something told him that Jamal was there. His instinct was right, but what he didn't expect was the scene unfolding inside. As he approached the studio doors, he heard a sharp, commanding voice boom through the room. "Quit wasting time and play the piano." Morgan Freeman's eyes narrowed as he pushed through the crowd, making his way inside to see what was going on. And there, standing stiffly before the grand piano, was Jamal, his grandson, shoulders tense, eyes downcast, visibly shaken. The weight of humiliation draped over the boy like a heavy cloak. Morgan Freeman didn't need an explanation. He'd seen enough in his lifetime to recognize what was happening. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. The moment Jamal saw him, his composure shattered. "Granddad!" Jamal sobbed as he ran into his grandfather's embrace. Morgan Freeman held him tightly, then pulled back to cup his face, gently wiping away his tears. His deep, reassuring voice broke through the heavy silence. "I heard your teacher shouting at you to play," he said. "Come on, let's show him how classical music is really played." Jamal sniffled, hesitant, "But I'm scared. Everyone's watching." Morgan Freeman gave him an encouraging nod, his eyes filled with wisdom. "Then let's give them something worth watching." Jamal swallowed his fear. "Tell you what," Morgan Freeman continued, leaning in with a playful smile, "I'll play with you. A duet. Sonata." A spark of courage flickered in Jamal's eyes. With his grandfather beside him, he felt stronger. The room, once buzzing with cruel amusement, fell into an anticipatory silence as the duo took their seats at the grand piano. Morgan Freeman positioned his fingers over the keys, and with a single nod, they began to play. What followed was nothing short of breathtaking. Jamal's fingers danced across the keys with practiced grace, intertwining seamlessly seamlessly with Morgan Freeman's mastery. Their notes blended, creating a melody so rich, so powerful that Mr. Calloway, who had been on with his mockery, now watched in awe. Gasps rippled through the room. His face had twisted from confusion to recognition, and then to sheer disbelief. Not only was Jamal capable of playing classical music, but he played with a brilliance that defied his age. And Morgan Freeman, the legendary Morgan Freeman, was his grandfather. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. By the time the final note echoed through the room, the once rowdy studio was deathly silent. Then, without warning, applause rent the air. The clap began slowly from the back of the room and quickly spread throughout the room. Cheers erupted. Students who had watched Jamal get mocked only moments ago were now on their feet, clapping, whistling, and cheering. And standing amidst it all, frozen in place, was Mr. Calloway, his mouth slightly open, his pride crumbling before him. Morgan Freeman turned to face him. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of his message. "You see, Mr. Calloway," he said, his eyes locked onto the stunned teacher, "talent has no color. Music belongs to everyone, and the only thing that truly defines greatness is heart." Mr. Calloway had no words, no retort, only shame. And just like that, everything changed. But the real question is, how would Mr. Calloway recover from this? Would he finally learn his lesson? Share this video to get your friends to see how things got finished. Morgan Freeman took a step closer to Mr. Calloway, his presence alone commanding the attention of everyone in the room. The students watched in silence, waiting for what would come next. "You know," Morgan Freeman began, his voice calm yet firm, "Jamal has been telling me about you for quite some time now." He let his words hang in the air, giving Mr. Calloway a moment to absorb them. "He's told me how you treat him differently, how you use him as the butt of your jokes, how you make him feel like he doesn't belong." A murmur spread through the crowd of students. Many of them nodded in agreement, some even exchanging glances as if they had just realized how much of what Morgan Freeman was saying was true. Mr. Calloway's face paled. He looked around, but there was nowhere to hide. The very students who once laughed along with his mockery were now staring at him with something close to disappointment. Morgan Freeman continued, his voice steady. "Jamal is a brilliant musician, but you wanted to reduce him to a joke, not because he lacked talent, not because he didn't belong in your class, but because of the color of his skin." He shook his head. "That's not just poor teaching, Mr. Calloway. That's cruelty." Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable. Jamal's grandfather then took a deep breath and straightened his posture. "Now, I could let this slide," he said, his voice carrying a weight that sent a chill down Mr. Calloway's spine. "But I won't." Mr. Calloway stiffened. "I will be reporting this to the school board," Morgan Freeman said matter-of-factly. "People like you have no business shaping the minds of young, talented students. It's time you learned that." It was a moment of justice, of long overdue reckoning. Mr. Calloway stood frozen, his reputation crumbling before his very eyes. Just then, one of the students raised their hand. "Mr. Freeman," the student said eagerly, "would you and Jamal consider performing at our graduation ceremony? We need something exciting this year." Another student chimed in, grinning. "Yeah, that duet you played was incredible. Way better than the boring stuff Mr. Calloway always plays." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A few students even mimicked Mr. Calloway's previous performances, exaggerating his stiff posture and slow, uninspired playing. Morgan Freeman threw his head back and laughed heartily. Then, with a teasing smirk, he turned to Mr. Calloway. "Classical music professional, huh?" he said with a chuckle, shaking his head. The humiliation on Mr. Calloway's face was undeniable. He had not only lost his credibility, but he had also become the joke he so often made Jamal out to be. In the meantime, Jamal stood taller than ever, his confidence radiating as he watched the same classmates who had once laughed at him now cheer for him. Morgan Freeman placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Come on, kid," he said with a proud smile. "Let's get out of here." As they walked out, the students slowly began to disperse, but not before throwing more jabs at Mr. Calloway's old performances. Some even hummed exaggeratedly slow, off-key versions of the classical pieces he had forced on them in past graduation ceremonies. Mr. Calloway sat down at the piano bench, shoulders slumped, staring at the keys in front of him. For the first time in his career, he felt what Jamal had felt under his scrutiny: small, exposed, and powerless. And that was a lesson he would never forget. That's a wrap. If you enjoyed this story, don't just stop here. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful tale. Don't miss out on our next jaw-dropping video. Stick around for another unforgettable ride.